Hachiko was an Akita dog born in 1923 in Japan who belonged to Professor Hidesaburo Ueno. Every single day, Hachiko would walk with his owner to Shibuya Station and wait for him to return from work. This routine continued perfectly until May 1925, when Professor Ueno suffered a fatal cerebral hemorrhage at work and never returned home. But Hachiko didn't know this. The next day, Hachiko went to the station at the usual time and waited. When his owner didn't show up, he returned the next day, and the next, and the day after that. For 9 years, 9 months, and 15 days, Hachiko made the trip to Shibuya Station every single day at the exact time his owner's train was supposed to arrive. He would sit in the same spot, scanning every face that walked through those doors, hoping to see his beloved owner one more time. Station workers and commuters began to recognize him, bringing him food and water, but Hachiko never stopped waiting. He became so famous that a bronze statue was erected in his honor at the station in 1934, and Hachiko himself attended the unveiling ceremony. On March 8, 1935, Hachiko was found dead on a street in Shibuya, still near the station where he had spent nearly a decade waiting. When they examined his body, they found he had terminal cancer and filariasis. But he never once abandoned his post. Today, Hachiko's statue remains one of Tokyo's most popular meeting spots, and his story has been told in books, movies, and documentaries worldwide. It reminds us that a dog's loyalty knows no bounds. In January 2011, devastating landslides hit the mountain region near Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, killing hundreds of people in one of the country's worst natural disasters. Among the victims was Cristina Maria Cesario Santana, who lost her life when mudslides destroyed her home. But what happened next captured the world's attention and broke millions of hearts. Leao, Cristina's loyal dog, somehow survived the disaster. He immediately began searching for her owner through the debris and chaos. When Cristina's body was finally recovered and buried, Leao found her grave. The medium-sized brown dog then did something that left rescue workers and photographers in tears. He laid down on the freshly turned earth of her grave and refused to leave. For days after the funeral, Leao stayed at that graveside, lying on top of the soil, as if trying to get closer to his owner one last time. Photographer Fabio Frieri captured haunting images of Leao at the grave during the funeral, and these photos spread across the world. They became a symbol of the disaster and the unbreakable bond between dogs and their owners. Even when rescue workers tried to coax him away with food and water, Leao would return to the grave. He stayed there through rain and sun, ignoring his own needs, unwilling to abandon the woman who had loved him. Eventually, family members were able to take Leao home, but his dedication during those dark days became a powerful reminder. Dogs grieve just as deeply as we do, and their loyalty extends even beyond death. In 2006, Miguel Guzman of Villa Carlos Paz, Argentina, passed away unexpectedly. His family grieved deeply, including his beloved German shepherd, Capitan, who had been his constant companion. The day after Miguel's funeral, Capitan disappeared from the family home. His wife and son searched everywhere, but couldn't find him. Then, about a week later, Miguel's family visited the cemetery to lay flowers at his grave, and they discovered something that would leave them stunned. Capitan was there, lying on top of Miguel's grave. The family had never brought Capitan to the cemetery, meaning the dog had somehow traveled across the city, searched through hundreds of graves, and found his owner's final resting place all on his own. The family tried to bring Capitan home multiple times, but he would always escape and return to the cemetery. Eventually, they accepted that Capitan had chosen where he wanted to be. Cemetery staff began caring for Capitan, providing food and water, and they noticed something remarkable about his behavior. Every single day, at 6 p.m. sharp, Capitan would walk to Miguel's grave and lay down on it, staying there through the entire night. Rain or shine, hot or cold, Capitan maintained this routine for 11 years. Capitan lived at that cemetery, sleeping on his owner's grave every single night. The cemetery became his home, and Miguel's grave became his bed. In February 2018, at the age of 15, Capitan passed away at the cemetery. Cemetery staff buried him next to Miguel, reuniting the faithful dog with his owner one final time. Capitan's story became internationally famous, proving that some bonds are so strong that not even death can break them. In August 2011, a military helicopter was shot down in Afghanistan, killing 30 American servicemen, including 22 Navy SEAL Team 6. It became known as the deadliest day in SEAL Team 6 history. Among those who lost their lives was Petty Officer John Tummelson, a brave SEAL from Iowa. His funeral was held in his hometown of Rockford, Iowa, and as family, friends, and fellow SEALs gathered to pay their respects, one mourner stood out. Hawkeye, John's loyal Labrador retriever, walked down the aisle of the funeral service and laid down directly beside John's casket, refusing to move. As the service proceeded and people gave emotional tributes to John's bravery and character, Hawkeye remained in that spot, his head down, his body still, lying as close to his fallen handler as he could possibly get. A photograph of Hawkeye lying beside the casket, taken by John's cousin, became one of the most powerful and heartbreaking images from the Afghanistan war. The image showed a dog who understood that something terrible had happened, a dog who had lost his best friend and wanted to be near him one last time. Throughout the entire service, even as people stood, sat, cried, and embraced, Hawkeye didn't move from that spot. His loyalty and grief were visible to everyone in that room, and there wasn't a dry eye in the building. After the service, Hawkeye was adopted by a close friend of John's, someone who had served alongside him and understood the special bond they shared. Hawkeye's moment at that funeral became a symbol of the sacrifices made by military working dogs and their handlers, a reminder that dogs don't just serve alongside soldiers, they love them with every fiber of their being. In 1850s Edinburgh, Scotland, a night watchman named John Gray, known locally as Old Jock, owned a small Skye Terrier named Bobby. The two were inseparable, with Bobby accompanying John on his nightly rounds through the city streets. But in 1858, John Gray died of tuberculosis and was buried in Greyfriars Kirkyard, a cemetery in Edinburgh's Old Town. What happened next became one of the most famous true dog stories in history. Bobby refused to leave his owner's grave. The little Skye Terrier spent the next 14 years living in Greyfriars Kirkyard, guarding John's grave through every season, every storm, and every freezing Scottish winter. Local residents tried to give Bobby a home, but he would always return to the cemetery. The cemetery's caretaker tried to chase him away multiple times, as dogs weren't allowed in the kirkyard, but Bobby was too quick and too determined. Eventually, the people of Edinburgh fell in love with Bobby's loyalty. Local restaurant owners would feed him, and residents would bring him blankets during harsh winters. In 1867, new city bylaws required all dogs to be licensed, or they would be destroyed. And Bobby was at risk since he had no official owner. But Lord Provost Sir William Chambers himself paid for Bobby's license and gave him a collar, officially making Bobby a ward of the city. Bobby became a celebrity in Edinburgh, with people traveling from across Scotland just to see the devoted little dog at his owner's grave. On January 14, 1872, 14 years after taking up his post, Bobby died at approximately 16 years old. He was buried just inside the gate of Greyfriars Kirkyard, not far from his beloved master. Today, a statue of Greyfriars Bobby stands near the kirkyard, and his story has been told in books, films, and documentaries. He's one of the most famous dogs in history, and a timeless symbol of loyalty. In mid-July 2013, in the frozen wilderness of Patagonia, Argentina, a 27-year-old man named Bernardo Leonidas Quiros was traveling with his family through the mountains. His loyal German shepherd, Talero, was with them. During the trip, their car broke down in the middle of a brutal snowstorm. The temperatures were freezing, and visibility was near zero. Bernardo made the decision to leave the vehicle with Talero to search for help. He told his family to stay behind and wait. But the snowstorm was more severe than anyone expected. Bernardo became disoriented in the blinding snow, and tragically, he died from exposure to the extreme cold. Talero stayed by his side as the snow continued to fall and the days turned into weeks. For 23 days, Talero remained with Bernardo's body in the frozen Patagonian wilderness. He protected his owner from wild animals and attempted to keep him warm by lying beside different parts of his body. Talero survived the brutal cold and hunger, never leaving his post. Finally, after more than 3 weeks, search and rescue teams encountered Talero at a remote intersection. The dog was weak and thin, but when rescuers approached him, Talero immediately began leading them through the wilderness. He guided them to where Bernardo's body lay, where he had been keeping his faithful vigil. The rescuers were stunned. Talero had stayed loyal for 23 days in freezing temperatures and dangerous conditions, protecting his owner until someone finally came. Talero's story spread throughout Argentina and the world, becoming a symbol of the incredible loyalty and devotion that dogs show to the people they love, even in the face of impossible odds. Talero survived his ordeal and was cared for by Bernardo's family, a living reminder of the bond that never breaks. In August 1936, a sheep herder in Montana became seriously ill and was taken by train to a hospital for treatment. But unfortunately, he passed away. His body was loaded onto a train at Fort Benton Station to be transported for burial. His faithful sheepdog, Shep, had accompanied him to the station and watched as his owner's casket was loaded onto the train. Shep watched the train pull away, and then he stayed at that station, waiting for his owner to return, day after day. Shep would meet every single train that arrived at Fort Benton Station, scanning the passengers as they disembarked, looking for the one face he wanted to see. When his owner didn't appear, Shep would settle down near the station and wait for the next train. Station workers tried to care for Shep, providing him food and water, and local residents began bringing him meals, but nothing could convince Shep to leave the station. For 5.5 years, Shep maintained his vigil, meeting every single passenger train that came through Fort Benton, which was 4 trains every day. The townspeople fell in love with Shep and his unwavering loyalty, and his story began to spread across Montana and eventually across the nation. Newspapers wrote about the dog who wouldn't give up, and people would travel to Fort Benton just to see Shep and pay their respects to his devotion. On January 12, 1942, tragedy struck. Shep, who was by then an old dog with failing hearing and eyesight, was on the train tracks meeting an incoming train, as he had done thousands of times before. But this time, he didn't hear or see another train approaching from the opposite direction. The train struck and killed Shep instantly. The entire town of Fort Benton mourned. More than 100 people attended Shep's funeral, and he was buried on a hillside overlooking the train station where he had kept his faithful watch. A memorial marker was placed at his grave, and today, a statue of Shep stands in Fort Benton as a permanent tribute to one of Montana's most beloved residents and a symbol of loyalty that transcended understanding. In 1941, in the Italian town of Borgo San Lorenzo, a brick kiln worker named Carlo Soriani found a badly injured puppy on the side of the road. Carlo took the puppy home, nursed him back to health, and named him Fido, which means faithful in Italian. The name would prove to be prophetic. Carlo and Fido became inseparable. And every single day, Fido would walk Carlo to the bus stop in the town square and wait there until Carlo returned from work in the evening. This routine continued perfectly for 2 years, but on December 30th, 1943, During World War II, an Allied bombing raid hit the factory where Carlo worked, and Carlo was killed. That evening, Fido went to the bus stop at the usual time and waited for Carlo to get off the bus. Carlo didn't arrive. Fido waited until the last bus came and went, then walked home alone. The next day, Fido returned to the bus stop at the same time and waited again, and the next day, and the day after that. For the next 14 years, until his own death in 1958, Fido walked to that bus stop every single evening and waited for Carlo to come home. Rain, snow, summer heat, wartime danger, nothing stopped Fido from keeping his vigil. The townspeople tried to explain to the dog that Carlo wasn't coming back, but Fido didn't understand, or perhaps he understood perfectly well and simply couldn't accept it. The story of Fido's loyalty spread throughout Italy and eventually across Europe. He became a national celebrity, and the town erected a statue in his honor while he was still alive, making him perhaps the only dog to attend the unveiling of his own memorial. When Fido finally died in 1958, at the age of 17, the entire town mourned. Hundreds of people attended his funeral, and he was buried outside the cemetery where Carlo was laid to rest, as close to his beloved owner as the rules would allow. Today, both Fido and Carlo have monuments in Borgo San Lorenzo, and Fido's story remains one of Italy's most treasured tales of loyalty and love. His name, which means faithful, couldn't have been more appropriate.